Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and today we're bringing you part 3 in our 5-part adaptation of The Man with the Twisted Lip, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Dr. Watson has stumbled into the middle of an investigation Holmes is carrying out into the disappearance of a reputable man named Neville St. Clair, who was inexplicably spotted by his wife in the upper window of a filthy opium den in London. A police investigation of the building found no sign of St. Clair, but did find his clothes and some evidence of a struggle. The only other man found in the room was a disabled beggar named Hugh Boone, who claimed no knowledge of St. Clair. As we return to the story, Holmes tells Watson all he knows about this man, Hugh Boone. Holmes continued his remarkable narrative as the cart rattled on towards Lee. The man suspected in the murder of Neville St. Clair was Hugh Boone, and his hideous face was one which was very familiar to every man who went much into the city. He was a professional beggar, though in order to avoid the police regulations, he pretended to conduct a small trade in wax matches. Some little distance down Threadneedle Street, upon the left-hand side, there was a small angle in the wall. Here it was that Hugh Boone took up his daily seat, cross-legged with his tiny stock of matches on his lap, so piteous a spectacle that a small rain of charity descended into the greasy leather cap which lay upon the pavement beside him. Holmes had watched the fellow more than once before ever making his acquaintance professionally on a case, and had been surprised by the harvest of small coins he would reap in a short time. Boone's appearance was so remarkable that no one could pass him without notice. A shock of orange hair, a pale face disfigured by a horrible scar, which, by its contraction, had turned up the outer edge of his upper lip, a bulldog chin, and a pair of very penetrating dark eyes, which presented a singular contrast to the color of his hair, all marked him out from amid the common crowd of mendicants. And so, too, did his wit, for he was ever ready with a reply to any piece of talk which might be thrown at him by the passer-by. Holmes became excited as he spoke of him.
Boone! That is the man whom we now learn to have been the lodger at the opium den, and to have been the last man to see the gentleman of whom we are in quest.
But a broken man like that, what could he have done single-handed against a man in the prime of his life?
He is broken only in the sense that he walks with a limp, but in every other respect he appears to be powerful and well-nurtured. Surely your medical experience would tell you, Watson, that weakness in one limb is often compensated for by exceptional strength in the others.
Please continue your narrative. He did so. Mrs. St. Clair had been so horrified by the sight of the blood upon the windowsill that she was escorted home in a cab by the police, as her presence could be of no help to them in their investigations. Inspector Barton, who was in charge of the case, made a very careful examination of the premises, but without finding anything which threw any light upon the matter. One mistake was made in not arresting Boone immediately, as he was allowed some minutes during which he might have communicated with his friend the opium den manager. But this fault was soon remedied. He was seized and searched without anything being found which would incriminate him. There were some bloodstains upon his right shirt sleeve, but he pointed to his ring finger, which had been cut near the nail, and explained that the bleeding came from there, adding that he had been to the window not long before, and that the stains which had been observed there came doubtless from the same injury. He denied ever seeing Mr. Neville St. Clair, and swore that the presence of the clothes in his room was just as much a mystery to him as it was to the police. As for Mrs. St. Clair's assertion that she had actually seen her husband at the window, he declared that she must have been either mad or dreaming. Here he was removed, loudly protesting, to the police station, while the inspector remained upon the premises in the hope that the ebbing tide might afford some fresh clue. And it did, although it was hardly what they had feared to find upon the mudbank. It was Neville St. Clair's coat, and not Neville St. Clair, which lay uncovered as the tide receded. Holmes laughed sharply to himself as he arrived at this point, cracking his whip over the shoulder of the swiftly trotting horse.
And what do you think they found in the pockets of that coat, Watson?
I cannot imagine.
No, I don't think you would guess. Every pocket was stuffed with pennies and halfpennies, 421 pennies and 270 halfpennies. It was no wonder that it had not been swept away by the tide. But a human body is a different matter. There is a fierce eddy between the wharf and the house. It seemed likely enough that the weighted coat had remained when the stripped body had been sucked away into the river.
But I understand that all the other clothes were found in the room. Would the body be dressed in a coat alone?
No, sir, but the facts might be met easily enough. Suppose that this man Boone had thrust Neville St. Clair through the window. No human eye could have seen the deed. What would he do then? It would, of course, instantly strike him that he must get rid of the telltale clothes. He would seize the coat then, and be in the act of throwing it out, when it would occur to him that it would swim and not sink. He has little time, for he had already heard the scuffle downstairs when the wife tried to force her way up, and perhaps he has already heard from the den manager that the police were hurrying up the street. There is not an instant to be lost. He rushes to some secret hoard where he has accumulated the fruits of his begging, and stuffs all the coins he can lay his hands into the pockets to make sure of the coat sinking. He throws it out, and would have done the same with the other garments had he not heard the rush of steps below, and only just had time to close the window when the police appeared.
It certainly sounds feasible.
Well, we shall take it as a working hypothesis for want of a better. Boone, as I have told you, was arrested and taken to the station, but it could not be shown that there had ever before been anything against him. He had for years been known as a professional beggar, but his life appeared to have been a very quiet and innocent one. There the matter stands at present, and the questions which have to be solved: what Neville St. Clair was doing in the opium den, what happened to him when there, where he is now, and what Hugh Boone had to do with his disappearance, are all as far from a solution as ever. I confess that I cannot recall any case in my experience which looked at first glance so simple, and yet which presented such difficulties.
While Sherlock Holmes had been detailing this singular series of events, we had been whirling through the outskirts of the great town until the last straggling houses had been left behind, and we rattled along with a country hedge upon either side of us. Just as he finished, however, we drove through two scattered villages where a few lights still glimmered in the windows.
We are on the outskirts of Lee. See that light among the trees? That is the cedars, and beside that lamp sits a woman whose anxious ears have already, I have little doubt, caught the clink of our horses' feet. I hate to meet her, Watson, when I have no news of her husband. Here we are. Whoa there, whoa!
We had pulled up in front of a large villa which stood within its own grounds. A stable boy had run out to the horse's head, and, springing down, I followed Holmes up the small, winding gravel drive which led to the house. As we approached, the door flew open, and a little blonde woman stood in the opening, outlined against the flood of light, one hand upon the door, one half raised in her eagerness, her body slightly bent, her head and face protruded, with eager eyes and parted lips, a standing question.
Well, no good news?
None.
No bad?
No.
Thank God for that. But come in, you must be tired. You've had a long day.
This is my friend, Dr. Watson. He has been of most vital use to me in several of my cases, and lucky chance has made it possible for me to bring him out and associate him with this investigation.
She took my hand and pressed it warmly.
I'm delighted to see you. Forgive anything that may be wanting in your accommodations. We have been hard-pressed lately.
My dear madam, I am an old campaigner, and I assure you no apology is needed. If I can be of any assistance, either to you or to my friend here, I shall be happy.
Now, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I should very much like to ask you one or two plain questions, to which I beg that you will give a plain answer.
Certainly, madam.
Do not trouble about my feelings. I'm no hysteric. I simply wish to hear your real, true opinion.
Upon what point?
In your heart of hearts, do you think that Neville is alive?
Sherlock Holmes seemed to be embarrassed by the question. She stood upon the rug and looked keenly down at him as he leaned back in a basket chair.
Frankly, madam, I do not.
Do you think that he is dead?
I do.
Murdered?
I don't say that. Perhaps.
And on what day did he meet his death?
On Monday.
Then perhaps, Mr. Holmes, you'll be good enough to explain how it is that I have received a letter from him today.
In revealing the existence of a new letter from our husband Neville, Mrs. St. Clair has thrown Holmes's investigation of the man's inexplicable disappearance down an entirely unexpected new path. What can this letter mean? Is St. Clair alive? And if so, how? Where? Join us again tomorrow evening to find out as we bring you part 4 in our adaptation of The Man with the Twisted Lip.